Ladies and gentlemen, today's episode is something really special. We are teaching a guy that's been playing poker for just 2 months, which is basically a few seconds in the poker world. His name is Paul, a lovely chap, and his thought process is extremely undeveloped. He's basically a complete beginner. Despite the fact that he doesn't know very much about the game yet, there are some real sparks of hope in this session. If you sometimes feel like some of the terms and jargon and theory at Carrot Corner goes a bit over your head, that you're not quite ready for it yet, this is definitely the video for you. Watch it all the way to the end. If you are more experienced, I still think you're going to solidify a ton of stuff in your foundations from watching this video. It was a really cool coaching session. Our Black Friday sale is live for just 2 more days at Carrot Corner. The Golden Carrot dropped recently as well. That is our giant package deal in which you can get cash injection, weapons of war, Carrot Poker School grades 1, 2, 3, and E, and permanent access forever to our subscriber library. All for one big saving. The 25% Black Friday discount applies to the Golden Carrot too. This is truly the best time to get going with your poker education. Check it out with the top link in the description after the video. Now let's get to this cool coaching session with Paul. Welcome to Poker Inferno, episode 6. Okay, ladies and gents, this is episode number 6 of Poker Inferno, and we are here with Paul, who has said to me over our chat there that he is probably the least experienced player that's been on the show, or maybe will be on the show. Paul, are you a total poker beginner? How long have you been playing, and how would you explain your experience level in this game?
Yeah, um I've only been playing like maybe like a month or two. Like I've not been playing very long at all, but because I have a background in like other games and stuff, and like video games and have gotten coaching in those before, like I really do believe in like coaching in learning like the correct way from the start if it's available to me. So I wanted to get into the game, but like maybe learn the modern way and don't like don't have decade old habits from the start.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think it's so common that people get into poker and their immediate exposure to poker is not something formal and rigorous like Carrot Corner. It's like something like watching live vlogs for 3 years and then they're just talking about board coverage and pot control for a decade. And yeah, that would be the equivalent of some bad league habits. Or you said you played Magic the Gathering as well. I think that'll
Yeah.
stand you in really good stead. Cool. All right. So this is very much aimed at coaching a total beginner. We're playing 5NL today. We're not expecting you, Paul, to have an advanced thought process yet, but I think this will be really interesting to hear like what are some of the more beginnery misconceptions about the game. What things have you grasped so far? What have you not? And how can we coach it? So yeah, I think this will be a brand new experience. I think it'll be really useful for less experienced players out there that are just getting started. And I think you're doing the right thing by getting involved in Carrot Corner already from the beginning. Although I'm biased, I would say that. But let's jump in. Let's play some hands and let's play Poker Inferno. Okay, you can sit in.
I think this is like maybe the bottom of what I'd play under the gun. Check. I think that. Oh wow, sorry. I think that I should see bet that. I'll fold that.
Okay.
Sorry, that wasn't very.
All right, Paul. So I know you're finding it a bit tough to talk as you're playing because it's really difficult and you're a new player. So I'll ask you now, what were your thoughts like on the flop? So you can talk to me about the c bet decision, and you can talk to me about facing the raise because there was a little bit of deliberation there between call and fold. So what were you thinking?
Yeah, like to be honest, like um I tend to like so when my hand is like right, well firstly, like when my hand is like more vulnerable, like I tend to like bet more on the flop. I don't know if that's like the correct decision or not because I have two overcards to the flop. Um but I tend to like I tend to like try and maybe play a little bit slower if I feel like my hand is like strong or robust, and um like is not like completely nutted. Um,
Okay.
so like if it can like if it's the kind of hand that wants to raise twice, then like rather than three times, like sometimes I'm willing to um wait wait for an extra card, like wait for an extra street. Um,
Hmm.
and with this one, like I just see bet because um like I didn't connect with the board. Like my opponent checked to me, although isn't that might be an error though, because that should be standard that they do that, right?
Hmm.
Um, like because they shouldn't want to like donk versus like pre-flop raiser.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know if I don't know if it should be my checking range just two overcards to the board there on like quite a low board, middling board.
Right. Well, the first thing to point out, I think, is that you're using a big sizing. So with that, you need to be more polar. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with betting ace jack with the jack of diamonds here, because I think this hand actually functions as like a bluff with a lot of prospects to improve. It can get quite nutted later, that sort of thing. So when your hand is somewhat limited in showdown value, even if it has some showdown value and has a bunch of ways of improving, it's normally okay to put that in a sort of polarized big bet strategy on the flop. What you're saying about how stable slash vulnerable your hand is makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's a really good instinct actually to have at this point in your career, where if you have a hand that doesn't crave a giant pot, that doesn't have a really, really high investment ceiling, that's not the nuts, the more stable that is, the more likely you are to check it and get value later. And the more vulnerable it is, the more likely you are to bet immediately. The only thing I would just prioritize and stress at this point in your development is that protection and denial, whatever you want to call it, like getting villain to fold worse hands than yours that are live, that's not a primary reason for betting, right? So as long as we can
Yeah,
always say I am value betting primarily or I'm bluffing primarily, we can then use that as a secondary reason to sort of decide which hands to bet and which hands to check. But I think like overall your instincts sound quite good there. What about the situation where you get raised then?
and yeah, so like to be honest, like primarily my reason for bluffing like was to um well it is to like get my opponent to fold primarily, right? um to be honest, like I was waiting to see if I waited until my opponent was able to like act, right? So if I were to check now, like if my opponent like checked back, then the next card was like meaningless, then I absolutely would have raised turn versus them
Bet turn, right?
because
Just to clarify this terminology, when we are just putting money into the pot before the opponent's done anything, we're betting, we're not raising. Right, just to
yeah,
make that
sorry.
clear, because the audience will
Yeah,
be like, what are we talking about? But I know what you mean. Okay, go on. Yep.
sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So like let's say like it played out like I just checked, opponent checks back and I
Hmm.
get to make like a turn decision. If there was no meaningful addition to the board on the turn, I would have bet because my opponent didn't show me any aggression. Um like and like at the first opportunity my opponent like showed me aggression there. So I
Hmm.
suppose like I'm wondering if because I've got two overcards to the board then my hand can improve. um Also had like backdoor flush draw. I wonder if it would be worth calling there and then um checking to see if my opponent continues the aggression or not.
So you're in position, so you're going to see whether they continue the aggression already, right, on the turn. And
Yeah,
I think the answer is no, because I want you to think more about what their range is for raising the flop. It's not just a game of cat and
yeah,
mouse, like where they sometimes continue, they sometimes don't, and you can just loiter around with random hands and see what happens. I know you're not
yeah,
doing this with a random hand. You're saying you've got two overs, you've got a diamond, etc. But really
yeah,
try and think about like from an early point in your career. So this is about building your fundamentals and your foundation. So really try to think about what sort of range a 5NL opponent in general just raises a flop C bet, a big flop C bet with on this board. Are they
yeah.
bluffing too much? Are they not bluffing enough? Are they too strong? Are they too weak? Like what do you think's going on there?
Yeah. Well, it seems like what they're telling me is they have like something that meaningfully connects with the board, and like, I don't think I did.
Right. So it's actually more than that. It's probably that they're raising not with just a random 10 or random 6, although that is possible, but it's more that their raising range in this spot's just very strong, and it's because it's not really very appealing out of position for most people just to raise a big flop c-bet here with low equity. It's not a natural thing to do, and so players at low stakes and micro stakes are not going to do it too often. So it's probably what we'd call an under-bluffed flop raise spot, where people are just raising too strong of a range, and our hand is flimsy. It's very borderline. If this was like uber late position, like button versus big blind, that's a really key factor as well as being aware of the positions. You might be able to call a small raise if you're trying to play like, if you're not playing exploitatively and you're just trying to play like a solid GTO based strategy, you might be able to call that hand. But when you're early position and you've bet big and you're playing like really low stakes and someone raises you here, fold is absolutely right. But the main thing that you should focus on is villain's range on the flop here and now for raising you, what it looks like and how well you're doing against it. Try not to get too bogged down by, you know, hypotheticals, turn lines. Try and get to the point of like, how well is my hand doing against this line? What is this line? What kind of range does this line correlate to for my opponent? And try and develop a feel of how humans are just naturally playing in a lot of spots, because that's the thing you're going to be exploiting, that human population. That's the thing you're going to be exploiting as you progress through your career. Okay, let's jump back in.
I think this is a call. Right, okay, so I've got like a... I'm gonna check this hand here. Right, okay. I got like a... Let me see. I'm gonna overbet here as a bluff primarily. Or, in fact, this might have been bad, actually. Maybe I should have sized down a little bit because it is like a flush draw. I mean, it's a bluff and a flush draw. Like it's...
Cool.
So I don't know if I should have sized down.
You're right that if you do lead this hand for an overbet sizing, then primarily you are bluffing, right?
Yep.
There's a chance that villain calls some weaker hands sometimes, like a worse diamond draw, a worse heart draw, and there's a chance you win against that at showdown by checking on a brick as well. So you could say that there's some like worse hands calling you, but primarily if you do that, you are trying to get better hands to fold.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know if like my hand would just win anyway, regardless of
right.
that.
So that's exactly the thought we're trying to cultivate, right? That's exactly the kind of thing we're trying to get you to think about at this stage, because the beginner trap is, I have a flush draw, therefore I bluff. And the question is like, do you make hands that are beating you fold on a really regular basis? And there are some of them. Like I do think that you fold out bigger ace-x, right? Like ace 10, ace jack, ace queen, ace king, like some hands like that. That's the main sort of gain of this play, is folding out threes, deuces, maybe fives if you're lucky. And then who knows, maybe some 5NL players just aren't used to facing overbet and they do actually fold like a 7 sometimes and stuff like that. Like it is possible. So I think the play is actually okay, but I think in GTO terms, a hand like ace 9 is probably slightly too big. So this hand might be slightly too much showdown value. Certainly if you had a hand like ace jack, I'd definitely lean towards checking, as the amount of better hands in villain's range that are folding becomes fewer and fewer because your hand is becoming bigger and bigger in terms of showdown value. Checking becomes better, right? Another option here is just like to check and check call and understand that the gain of that is that your opponent may stab a lot of hands that are completely dead against you. And even if it is the case that by bluffing you fold out some better hands and like bluffing is okay in terms of EV, it's obviously very plus EV, it could be that checking is higher EV. Because what do you think about this population's range for checking behind on the flop? What kind of hands are they usually going to have?
Like very weak hands. Like I think most people would stab on the flop. If their hand had any sort of value, like even like middling value hands.
Yeah, I think that's largely right, and that's not obviously the way they should be playing. They should be more polarized. They should be protecting the checking range, checking back some decent stuff, some overpairs on this sort of board. You can actually check a lot, and you can check back a lot of overpair at low stakes, micro stakes, 2-5 live, 1-2 live, like 10NL online, whatever you want to call it. They're going to be underprotected, which means that your hand lands on the turn with much more showdown value, and it also means that if you check and face a bet, you're going to be in way better shape than quote unquote you should be. You're going to be beating way more of these hopeless bluffs. So I think check call is just the best line here, even though over betting with many draws is going to be good on a texture like this. We have a lot of nutted stuff, and that's the sizing you can use. I just think checking against this pool's hopelessly weak range and just getting them to bluff. And you're winning a lot of showdown anyway. If they don't, I think it's just better. I think it's just higher EV, and you're then putting more money into the pot against trash and less money into the pot against, like, I don't know, 7-6 or some hand that's actually ahead of you. So I think checking's better.
That makes sense. Right, okay. So he's checked to me. Seemed... I'm not sure how good this is for my range. I'm gonna do like a bigger bet for that reason. Okay.
Jack 6. I just want to check what you meant there when you said, I'm not sure how good this is for my range, so I'm going to bet bigger for that reason. Can you just elaborate a little bit? Because I wasn't sure where the thought process was going. And I know it's a mundane hand, but hearing how you think at this point in your career is super effective, because I can hear all of the little inaccuracies and correct them very early on. So yeah, what did you mean by that?
No worries at all. Like, I think that, like, just because there's like 2 jacks on the board already, it's like hard to connect with on average. And like, I don't think that like the 6 is really good for like the pre-flop raiser at all. So from like from stuff that I've like read on sizing, or like been around like carrot poker and stuff like that, as far as I'm aware, like if you're like, let's say if your hand contains a lot of, like, I don't know, overcards to jacks here, like is like the pre-flop raiser, then like you should perhaps like bet bigger if you're in a situation where your hand, you either have it or you don't, like, or you're representing that you have it. Whereas like if you're really likely to just have something that connects with the board, like you should bet smaller. As far as I know.
Right, okay. So some of this is right and some of this isn't so accurate. So the things that are good here are that if you are betting with the polar range, then you would go bigger. So if you're betting selectively with sort of really thick value hands, very high equity, and want lots of money in the pot, and then bluffs, you would use a bigger sizing. I think in this spot, though, if you think about your range, there's lots of hands in your range here that are kind of a mixed bag, that are mediocre. You have hands like ace queen that are like absolutely bang in the middle. You have hands like 5s, 8s, 7s, 3s, all sorts of stuff that's fairly mediocre. Meanwhile, this is what we would call, and it's a very useful term for you, this is like a hot or cold board for your opponent. If your opponent has missed this flop, they have, on average, nothing as the big blind caller. Okay, they have a few combos of pocket pairs, but they're mostly going to have queen high, 10 high, ace high, 5 high, you name it, right? They have a lot of nothing here. And when they've connected, they have quite a lot of jack, just because a jack is a card that people play more often in an offsuit form pre-flop, and that's going to make it more sort of combinatorically abundant. There's going to be more combinations of a jack. So if they either have a strong hand like a jack, or they have nothing for the large part, the opponent's range is actually quite polarized on these hot or cold boards, and we want to put less money into the pot when that's the case. So paired boards like Jack, Jack X, Ace, Ace 5, boards like this are classic small bet boards in theory, because the opponents have bet too hot or cold here in terms of equity. So that's a useful pattern for you to internalize.
Oh yeah, in fact, that intuitively makes a bit more sense, because I'm thinking about what my actions are facing an open, which is like, well, the standard for my hand like increase. So in order to call like an open. So it makes sense to me why like the higher cards would be more relevant to the caller.
They're not more relevant to the caller at all. They're good for you too. It's just that when you're looking at the caller, like, I'm not comparing his range to your range here. I'm just saying that the big blind's range is in itself quite polarized, because when they have a jack or a 6, they have a hand that's good and is continuing to any bet size, and when they have missed the flop, they have a hand that's bad. I'm at no point there, just to be clear, am I saying it's better for the big blind's range than it is for yours. It's better for your range, because the pre-flop raiser always has a range advantage unless the board is like miraculous for big blind. Like, I mean, 6-5-4, 4-4-5, 3-4-5. When the board is not one of those like big blind happy flops, the pre-flop aggressor has a range advantage almost always. That doesn't allow you to use a big sizing though. That just
Okay.
means you're going to be betting a lot. You have a lot of fold equity. Villain has a lot of trash. That's going to make you want to bet a lot, but it's going to
Yeah.
be for a small size because of the polar nature of the opponent's range in and of itself, just its natural shape here. It's Jack
Yeah.
X, really high equity, 6x, really high equity, 8 7s, 5s, really high equity, like for this board, and then like hands that have just whiffed completely that are just like really low equity. So because there's a bit more natural polarity here with the opponent's range, keep your sizing down. Many of the hands you're betting here are mediocre. They're blurring the line between value and bluff. And you should be betting really often on boards
Yeah.
that are like innocuous and dry, because your fold equity as the end position player is just really, really good in these spots as well, right? You're just going to generate a lot of fold equity. Betting often makes a load of sense, but this is not really a board where we want to use a big
Yeah.
bet. A board that we'd want to use a big bet would be where villain doesn't really have many nutted combos at all. So imagine something like 9-3 deuce, where like, okay, they might have banked a miracle set, but for the most part, they're capped. And when you have an overpair, you want that pot getting nice and big.
Gotcha.
Oh.
The pre-flop razor checked. I want to stab here.
Okay, so your thought process here was they've checked, I bet. I'm guessing this is about the fact that you think their check is weak, that you think they're folding a lot, that they're not protecting their checking range.
Yeah, like I know it's like good. Like, so one thing I've learned from like watching like your content, and like it probably applies to the micros a lot, is that um like having like people having an underprotected like checking range. Um and I've tried to make it like a point of mind to like maybe overemphasize like my checking range a little bit, like try and make the showdown value at least somewhat good, but doesn't seem like it's the pool does that on average.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so pool is underprotected. They are overfolding here. I agree. The problem with your line is that when you bet big here,
Yeah.
because you have ace 9 high, you actually have a very large amount of showdown value for the spot.
Okay.
For a wide blind versus blind confrontation where ranges span many, many weak combos. You know, people can have Jack 8 offsuit, just for
Yeah.
example. Ace 9 off is actually bang in the middle again. So what we need you doing from a really early point, Paul, is
Mhm.
respecting polarity and saying that when I'm betting big on the flop or turn or river, I'm not doing it with the middle of my range. I'm either doing it as a bluff, which means there are significant portions of villain's range that beat me, that are folding, that are ahead of me, that are folding, or I'm doing it for value because I want to grow the pot and I expect to have a large amount of equity or decent amount of equity. I'm a
Yeah.
favorite when I've done that. So ace 9 is neither. It's a polarization mistake, we'd say, to bet this hand big, because we are then dipping into the middle of our range and we're betting a medium strength hand big. Now, in exploitative world, this gets murkier because there is way more fold equity than there should be. So I could
Yeah.
ask you, if you're getting raised here hardly ever, villain has a really weak range here, does that make big betting okay? And I think the answer is still no, because again, the hands they're folding are still just worse hands by and large. It
Yeah.
might make a strategy of sort of stabbing these hands small and
Mhm.
cleaning up a lot of equity, just getting a lot of denial. It might make that okay. But I
Yeah.
think embarking on like the big bet line here, it will be better than it is in theory, but it is a bit of a mistake with this hand in theory. So we are deviating a bit too far there, I think, to bet this hand big.
Okay.
So what would be a good hand to bet big with to exploit the fact that villain is folding too much? Like, think about what would you want to bluff with here? What kinds of hands? Give me some examples.
Um let me think. Like, well, like just like a lot more, like if I'm bluffing, then like a lot more airish hands
Yeah.
that um
Can
if
you
I'm
conjure some of them up? Because a lot of times new players, they can see what's visually there, but they struggle to
yeah.
conjure up hands that aren't on the board. So what kind of hands could you have here that just haven't connected very well but would still be good to bluff here given the population read?
um like um like I don't know, Jack like a low card, like a free, for example.
Right. Yeah. If you
Like
had that pre,
there's
that would be good. But like you could even just go into the realms of like Jack Nine offsuit. And the reason I
yeah,
go to the offsuit is that it's again just going to be there more often, right? You have a lot of
yeah,
offsuit combinations because they're easier to have in the first place.
yeah. 3 times is the amount of suited combos, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. You could say three
Uh,
quarters of all the unpaired hands are offsuit. You know, that's a
yeah,
good heuristic.
that makes sense. Like, yeah, like the thing is, like Matt, like when you ask me to like if I can think of a hand to conjure up, like I guess the answer would be I could think of lots.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's other factors like, um, well, I don't know if there's other factors like there's a hand that's like too bad to bluff, but
Very good
maybe,
question.
maybe
Yeah.
yeah,
So the way you're talking to me about poker, I can see a lot of potential. Like what I'm seeing is like a really, really new player that doesn't know that much yet and has some confusions, but I'm seeing like sparks of something that is completely on the right lines, right? Which is like unusually on the right lines for this point in your development. So when you say like, are there hands that are too hopeless to bluff? You're actually doing the learning poker in the right way thing, and you're kind of saying, I know that in certain landscapes, there are standards about how prosperous my hand needs to be to bluff. And there are certain landscapes where I can't just bluff the absolute bottom. And the answer here is that in game theory, the answer to that is mostly no. Like most hands here that are like what we call semi-trash, like that group, or semi-trash if you're not American, which neither of us are, being Scottish. So
yeah,
I'll just call it semi-trash. If we have a hand like, you know, Jack 8 here, even if it's
yeah,
hearts, there's still pair draw and backdoor straight draw, and it's far from completely hopeless. So even a hand that looks like total air, like Jack 8 of hearts, you know, back in the old days when Super System 2 was the poker Bible and Doyle Brunson was younger, okay, he's not with us anymore, sadly, but you know what I mean. He would have said like that hand's a trash hand, like you can't bet it here, and he'd be right in certain situations that like you can't bet total trash and you need a draw to do something. And you know, people talked a lot about flush draws and straight draws back then as being the hands you could bluff with. But in position, when you have like some pair draw going on and some backdoor stuff going on, you're going to be able to bluff in theory with most hands as long as they're not showdown value, as long as you're not make polarization mistakes. So you can imagine Jack 9 offsuit, King 9 of hearts, King 5 of clubs,
yeah,
10-9 offsuit. All these sorts of combos are absolutely fine to bet at equilibrium. Like there's no problem in a solver betting them. And with the population read that people are overfolding, you
yeah,
should be stabbing these combos. What I'd probably recommend here, though, is an exploit strategy of stabbing small when you stab, just to take advantage of all the air that they're check folding. You don't need to go big to take advantage of that. And then just making sure you respect polarization and check the middle, like a hand like this or ace 10 or whatever. Just check. You're doing really well by checking. It's fine.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's also like the risk reward. Like, I guess that like players would just struggle to adhere to that, like folding the right amount of the time. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're basically saying is that if we have Jack 8 offsuit here, our check EV is not very good. And because it's overfolded and under raised if we bet, our bet EV is higher than our check EV. Whereas when we have ace 9, it's like our bet EV is higher than it should be, but so is our check EV. And we know
yeah,
in theory that checking's better. So while betting has improved exploitatively here, so has checking. And is it clear that betting is now better than checking with this hand? No, I don't believe so. So that's
no,
kind of what's going on here. That's why we always respect the middle when we're big betting a flop, betting a turn, betting a river, raising someone. Always respect like that polarization idea, right?
gotcha.
Okay, let's jump back in.
Got pocket fours on the button. I'm gonna size up slightly because I've got a limper. Although that might be a mistake actually, because that person is super short stacked.
Man, how tilting are the GG? like
Yeah, I did
emotes
like
and stuff.
it's such a mess. Like a
It's like an absolute, like, I don't know, the way the site is with like everyone be like, come on, run it twice, let's go. It's just like it encourages so much like gambling and stuff, doesn't it? Like it's, you can see why they
yeah.
do it, right? Let's talk about that one actually, because I think there's some meat there in those bones. All right, Paul. So this is a spot where, you know, if you're going to ISO against this limper, which I think you can, you are just going to be going with it, right? You're going to be calling it off when they shove. Now, you didn't notice the stack size here, and that's
Yeah.
something we'll work on, is that you've just got to develop that table vision. And there's a lot of experienced players, much more experienced than you, who don't have good enough table vision and ignore stuff all the time. They're so dialed into their blockers and range advantage and the stuff they've been studying that they fail to even scan the table and see that they need to make a clear exploit due to stack size or player type. So, very common leak. Um, don't worry about sizing because you're going with it anyway. I don't really care what sizing you go. If you were making a raise fold because villain was a bit deeper, I think you should go smaller so that you're just
Yeah.
losing less when you raise fold, and it won't really change the way they're playing too much. Um, this is an interesting spot when the guy calls and then there's a jam. Do you want to be playing fours here, three-way, or do you want to be like heads up and trapping the dead money in against that limper that's now gone all in?
I think my instincts says that I would rather be freeway and hit a set because it's like more. I think it's more profitable in theory. Like the thing is, it's this is like a weird one. Like this decision was mostly just on instinct because by the time it got back round to me, I noticed the stack size and I was like, I've been in this situation before where the short stack is like playing far too wide. Um, so like normally I would like also it's not a normal jam either. Is the thing. Like it's not like a like it's not like a player with like the standard 100 big blind like stack size like jammed on me, or I would absolutely just fold
Yeah, of
there.
course.
Like the standard just needs to be higher. So to be honest, this is just like this was just like an experience thing where I've noticed like, oh yeah, the short stack player have been in this situation before where they're like all inning way too much. So
Yeah, yeah, they're desperate, right? They're kind of in a sort of cornered animal mentality a lot of the time. So that's natural human nature here. Their range is way too wide. What I'm really getting at though is can we actually four bet? Like can we actually re-raise, to use the old school term? Because what is the small blinds range here? Do you think when they call in this spot where they don't three bet you after you isolate the limper? What does small blind usually have?
um well like an like if do you mean if like a bet for like a smaller sizing or just call
No,
even
no, what
like
happened in the hand? So in this spot, you
yeah
made it 3 point whatever, and the small blind called, right?
yeah
So I'm asking you what you think the small blind's range looks like.
um like like I'd say pretty good. Like the if like what a normal player would play if they called. I mean, it's not like amazing because they didn't re-raise me or
Right.
anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they won't have like like a, they won't have like a Broadway pairs or like Ace King or anything like that. Maybe not even Ace Queen. Um, so yeah, like a just a normal hand, like nothing that's like super good pre-flop
Right.
since
So
they didn't.
capped.
Yeah,
Mediocre, capped. Okay, good.
yeah,
So because you hit set so rarely, that's not really the main factor in a spot like this. It's more about your equity with your hand
yeah,
and how often you're going to win the pot than it is about how often you hit set. My thought is if you like, you can't lose any more against the limper who's all in. So if you
yeah.
just four bet it to like
Oh, right.
23 big blinds
Yeah,
or something like that, what you're going to do is you're going to force the small blind's going to think you've got a much better hand than you do, actually. And it's an exploitative spot where you're actually going to force the small blind to fold most of their capped range, trapping in their dead money while forcing them to relinquish all of their equity. And you're now probably a small favorite or flipping with the under the gun player with the small blind's dead money trapped in the pot. Now, the downside to this play is when the small blind wakes up with a good hand and jams on you and punishes you horrendously. But I think that's like once in a blue moon. I think that's like super
They would have
rare.
already did that, right? Like, so that makes a lot of sense. To be honest, like, right, okay, like, I think like the main thing I'm missing here is that like, um, I need to like maybe be locked in from pre-flop, and sometimes like this, like the flop sort of decision making already happens. It's not like, right, and let's get to the flop and I'll start attacking
Right.
condensing actions with my polarized range. Like it can start pre-flop as well.
Yeah, and this isn't anything about attack. This isn't attacking with a polarized range. This is
All right.
actually attack. This is just taking any hand that's
Yep.
surviving against under the gun and forcing small blind's cap range out of the pot so as
Yeah.
to increase your equity and trap his dead money in the pot. You're doing this with a linear range, not a polarized range. Most of the time that you attack in poker, post flop, you're going to be polarized, but pre flop equities run so close together that it's a much more linear situation. So here for us, it's just like, yeah, okay, it's plus EV to call, but it's higher EV to just click it back because from small blind's point of view, they're just going to have to fold so often and their money's already in the middle, and that's worth so much more than like having them in the pot in case you hit a set. It's going to be really hard to get paid if you hit a set actually because it's a protected pot. There's money in there from a player that can't be made to fold, so people are not going to be very loose with paying you off in these situations. So really interesting pre-flop spot, and one that like I do agree you need to dial in there. As soon as you see that jam, you should be dialing yourself into that hand like you would be a river spot or a turn spot or something that seems more important.
Exactly. Like it's like I need to make that connection with pre-flop decisions as well. It's like another street.
Right.
I'm gonna check this for now. I've got like a nut flush draw. I want to see if he stabs me, and I will raise. I'll raise here.
Cool. Let's talk about that. So a couple of things in this spot. The first is when you're three betting small blind versus button, we do have a linear range. We don't have a really polarized range. We do have some medium to good hands in there, like nines or ace jack and king queen and stuff like that, which might mean that we go a bit smaller than if we were in the big blind. But your sizing is maybe a bit too small, where in position can sort of call.
Oh, yeah. Damn it! I should have accounted for that in that like the blinds are like have already invested, so it's not that much of a raise, right?
Yeah, it's just that when you're out of position, people have an easier time calling as well, right? Than they do when they're in position, they have an easier time calling than when they're out of position. So the main sort of thing poker theory does to counter that is just goes bigger with the three bet. Otherwise, they can call far too many hands profitably. The big problem with this pre-flop though is that you're in a very high rake environment and you're making a three bet that's not actually GTO standard approved. It's not strong enough in GTO small blind versus button. It's a losing three bet at equilibrium, meaning in theory, and it's going to be more losing in reality for two reasons. One is that rake is really bad, and the second one is that people over defend to three bets. So what you want to do is actually drop the sort of unplayable trashier hands out of your range and three bet a little bit stronger out of position at these stakes because people over defend. They do under four bet, which means you can three bet like quite wide. I just think ace nine off is starting to get a bit too wide for this rake structure. If you win a rake free game, this would be winning, like I've got no doubt, but it's just one of those spots where the rake sort of eats you alive with a hand like this. Post flop, interesting that your first instinct was to check. I actually quite like check raising as played. I think that's a great exploit at these stakes. I think people are betting far too many random pairs and then folding, betting too many like just medium strength hands and then folding. They're betting too merged basically, right? Not polar enough. So I like the check raise as played. I'm just wondering about like that first decision of whether to c bet or whether to check. Like you very quickly said, I've got a nut flush draw, therefore I'm checking. I just want to hear that more of that logic. I want to hear where you're going with that.
Yeah, no, so like I don't think that my hand is good enough. Like I don't have like a made hand yet. Um, and I don't think that it's good enough to like pile or try and build the pot as much as possible yet. I know that it um like so I'd say that I'd be comfortable with a hand like this, like having like two streaks of value if the flush does hit. Um well and like it so I have like an up flush draw and I don't know, like the thing is like when I'm out of position, I guess is the main thing. Like also the need to like build the pot is less because like
Okay,
it's
and I
not like it
understand. Cool. I totally understand what's going on now. Thank you. I just want to sort of guide you a little bit here.
sorry.
So previously, when we had ace nine off, we were big blind versus small blind, and our hand was very much a medium strength hand because ranges were very, very wide. The small blind had loads of hands we were just crushing or beating. In a 3-bet pot, small blind versus button ranges are much tighter. So the showdown value of ace of clubs, nine of diamonds here is much, much lower than it was in the spot we looked at previously. So this is not, you should not be considering value betting as such as the primary reason for betting. Even though
Yeah,
your hand does have a lot of equity, I'd be thinking about generating folds and I'd be more on the sort of semi-bluffing sort of train here. And there's no reason not to bet your hand as a bluff or semi-bluff or whatever you want to call it, or hybrid on this flop. And yeah, you do get called by some worse hands, like maybe you do get called and have a lot of equity, like you're not favorite maybe, but you have a lot of equity, and you get hands that beat you to fold. En masse, actually, you get a lot of hands that beat you to fold. So you can simplify this to just saying, I can bluff my hand, but I don't have to. That would be the theory of an optional bluff.
yeah,
Grade one of the Carrot Poker School, first course you should take, by the way, on poker when the time comes. Um, Go ahead and, when the time comes, watch lecture 2 and 3 of that really, really closely about value betting and bluffing, because what we do in there is we separate bluffs out into mandatory, you've got to do it, optional, you can bluff, it's fine to bluff, but you don't need to, and prohibited, you cannot bluff this hand. And here you just have this sort of optional bluff. You can check raise with it, you can check call with it, you can bet with it. In theory, all of these lines are actually okay. In practice, I quite like check raise. I have a soft spot for it against this pool due to their rampant stabbing. So I actually like your line, but I think you were thinking about your hand as too much of being in the middle here, when actually it can just be betting for the sort of bluff fold equity reasons.
yeah. For me, like this was like for me, I was like I guess I was like torn between it being like a bluff and a value hand.
It's
It's
both,
like
yeah.
yeah, that's like that's so it was hard for me to like the thing is like see when I bet there, like I wasn't sure if like I was sort of both doing it for bluff and um like growing the pot for like
Yeah,
value
yeah,
potentially there was my
absolutely.
instinct.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is both. There are elements of both. And there's a thing in grade two called the betting sink, where there's these taps or faucets if you're from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And there's three of them. There's value, bluff, and denial, and they can all be flowing, or one of them can, or two of them can. And when the sink reaches a certain level of being full, you're allowed to bet. It's kind of like that. And here, the value and bluff and denial taps are all kind of flowing. You're getting worse hands that are live to fold. You're getting better hands to fold. You're getting called and then having quite a decent amount of equity. It's all there. And they're not mutually exclusive in this case because the equity is draw equity. It's improving to the nuts equity. It's not made hand equity. Whereas the confusion here is that before the other ace nine that we had, that's actually made hand equity, and therefore it really is just in the middle camp, right? There's not as much of a value element to the bet. So yeah, you can have a hand that has both going on simultaneously. It's not a contradiction in terms. One way I think about that is it's like an extreme denial bet. It's like I'm making villain fold some hand like pocket fives, no club, and I'm making them fold like 40% equity against me. It's almost like a really extreme form of protection or something like that in a way. But it's like, yeah, it's value and bluff. Both are going on. So it's good that you're definitely picking up on some stuff here that you've got all the raw ingredients. Maybe you've not yet put them together fully, but they're all there. And I think we better wrap this up because we've had so much discussion here. Even though we've not had lots of cool spots, we have had... I'd like to think that we've gone into your fundamentals and straightened out a few things and organized a few things and given you some stuff to work on with your thought process.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pete. Like, I appreciate the opportunity.
Do you have any final questions or thoughts? How's today sort of left you feeling? Anything you're going to take away from this in particular?
No, like, well, like, I mean, I will take away a lot from it. Like, I'll, like go back over like the spots again. Like, but yeah, I just really like this series. Honestly, like, I guess that would be my like I'd compliment this series idea because like I've already seen the first episode of it like before playing here,
Mm-hmm.
and I really like it. And the reason that I do is because like um so the way I like to learn sometimes is like heavy, like sort of theory and like slides and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But also like another way I like to learn is just in practice, like maybe watch people stream, like see them put it into practice. But this series seems like a nice combo of both, where you're seeing someone's decision making live, and then it's a quick reflect. So it kind of like, there's not as much of a separation between
Mm-hmm.
the sort of theoretical learning and like your out of game learning
Yeah.
and your in game learning. It's like a lot more paired together. So as a newer player, it's like from the like first video, it was like um clear to me, and I'm like, oh, people can think like this in this short a time, like.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. All right, cool. Remember, guys, our Black Friday sale is still ongoing until Wednesday, the 4th of December, I believe, although this is like, early November, so I may be just getting the dates wrong. But yeah, this is Black Friday around the time. Check out carrotcorner.com, 25% off site-wide. Best time to invest as well in your poker education because the golden carrot is live too. That is cash injection, weapons of war, the full Carrot Poker School grades 1, 2, 3, and E, and also permanent forever access until like the world blows up or something to the subscriber library on Carrot Corner and those 100 videos from our pros as well. So check that all out before Black Friday ends on the 4th of December, and we will do another bunch of Poker Infernos. I'm thinking about doing 10, 15, 20. If you're part of our Discord, you want to do what Paul's done today, get in the hot seat, get a bit of coaching from me. You can see I'm quite friendly. I'm not really telling him he doesn't deserve to play the game. Don't be shy. Get involved and say hello on Discord if you're part of the community as well. See you guys soon for another episode of Poker Inferno. Bye for now.